Something's really wrong with your reload UI. I'm offline. Oh. No, you're back on. Yep. Something happened to you. We're just gonna exit game here and relog. Something happened to you. Don't know what.
All of that to unique-looking Dogon villages, some history of colonialism, and a king you get to kill. It is a typical video game reductionism, but I have to say, there is nothing quite unique looking as those Dogon villages. Where the original Far Cry borrowed from the island of Dr. Moreau, Far Cry 2 looked towards Heart of Darkness, where instead of a madman trying to control nature, nature and its horrors rule over all. Man versus nature isn't just a marketing tag here, but a mechanic that creates aesthetics through experience. Often you find yourself either in spaces so open they devour you, or on a plateau enclosed by a thick jungle, and this nature never lets you win, only survive. You can't turn such a setting into your playground. A lot of settings have been proclaimed to be a character in themselves, and Africa from Far Cry 2 definitely deserves that title. Fire is, without a doubt, a part of the setting. How a patch of black looks ominous after the fire winds down. Far Cry 2 likes to keep its characters in the dark. They are often partially in the shadow, revealing the true nature of this world that keeps its secrets and plots. Half of their face in absence of light, which conceals more than just their face. For such a chaotic game, it still offers a lot of peaceful and picturesque moments and sceneries, showing us the duality of nature's indifference through beautiful sunsets, rain in the jungle, or the desert sand under a full moon. All of it supported by a pervasive ambient score that goes deeper than skin, with sharp contrasts between calming and ominous. There is always a very strong sense of location supported by environment and its details. Those who can't help but steer from the main paths will find many different pieces of a larger story. Animal skulls in the desert, car wrecks, crashed planes, food being prepared in the trunks, bus skeletons, sacrificial pits, deals gone bad, trails of blood that lead to a corpse and a diamond case, piles of burning passports. This is silent storytelling, and its story is about an unforgiving world and human savagery within. Even that radio station host is a grim reference to the role radio stations had in Rwandan genocide. But the most consistent element across all environments is the sun. As if it is an all-seeing eye of a cosmic giant, it bathes everything with light. Sunset and sunrise flood the world with tints of yellow and orange. Everything that's illuminated casts a dark shadow. Metal of your weapons reflect the distant light. Its rays sift through treetops. It mirrors itself on the river's surface. You feel both its influence and its absence. Sun in Far Cry 2 is something you have to experience. Even AI is affected by its setting, since enemies become less aware of your presence. Apart from the desert, savanna and the jungle, the world of Far Cry 2 has a lot of interesting locations like old slave outposts, European companies, a castle, Dogon villages, scrapyards, oasis, with styles such as colonial, industrial, shanty-like, and tribal. Those four possible starting locations are interesting in particular. A slaughterhouse where flies buzz around drying meat as if it is their kingdom. Lumberyard with piles of logs resting in the sun. Fishery with dead fish piled on top of each other, staring into nothing with their dead eyes. And cockfights with an improvised ring for them to hurt each other. Things die in all four places. It feels like foreshadowing of what's to come. Shifting the paradigm from the original Far Cry, instead of fighting man-made monsters, you fight just men. Far Cry 2 does not run away from the fact that millions of years of evolution are stronger than a couple of thousands of years of civilization. They recognize the fact that there is within a man some kind of primal animalistic energy, survival of the fittest, the will to power, Thanatos, dark side of the human nature, whatever term, description or euphemism you find convenient. And when the periodic basic ritual of bloodletting starts, it manifests itself in all its vicious glory. They don't necessarily show it on such a scale, but it is implied. War here is an unseen character. What they do show is violence wrapped inside politics, and the result is grotesque. There is no glory of Call of Duty in Far Cry 2. War is dirty, absurd, immoral. There is no good side here, no victory worthy of celebration. This manifests directly through both faction missions and combat. Just one human being against the other. Failed government and civil war bring specific aesthetical elements, forcing certain experience on the player as a result. Instead of climbing the hierarchy of power, there is no hierarchy. Instead of making lasting friendships, you get to be used by both sides. Instead of being a hero or a villain, you get to be a mercenary doing good, bad, and everything in between. It's easy to let the player loose on Nazis or terrorists, but how would you do such a thing in a civil war you do not understand? This game simply does not offer power fantasies.
Well,
it's man versus man all the way, and who gets to decide who's right when there are no good guys nor winners. You don't get to decide who's right, you just get to see how hard the choice is. In most games you can clearly
Keep your
distinguish
ear to the
heroes and
ground.
villains, sort them out in your head, point your guns towards them, and know how you should feel once they're dead. In Far Cry 2, there aren't a lot of people whose death should make you sad. At the core of every conflict is just man versus man, two life forces trying to render the other one dead, hoping to build an empire on a pile of their bones. Leaders and captains wear distinctive clothes to make them more personalized and memorable. Apart from that, everyone else are just generic models so that you don't face someone menacing or unique. There are no interesting characters to kill. You are only a part of the problem in all of this, and you're neither its cause nor solution. You bring your fair share of pain and suffering, but you never go above that man versus man dichotomy. Money is a strong motivator, even in fictional worlds. A reason to do things, means to acquiring better equipment and therefore better position in the world. Video game currency is also a chance for designers to think up something creative which reflects the aesthetics of the game as a whole. There has been a lot of video game currencies over the years, usually just cash bundles, golden coins, money bags, and other more or less symbolic ways of representing value, but rarely they are so distinctive and expressive as blood diamonds from Far Cry 2. They are an example of a direct consequence of the game's setting and tell a story about its world. Approximately 49% of all diamonds originate from Central or Southern Africa. Some of the mines are controlled by paramilitary groups who finance their causes through diamond trade. These are known as blood diamonds. They even became a subject of an international controversy back in 2003. Surely it is not okay for Europeans to wear conflict diamonds on their fingers or around their necks and finance massacres across the seas. In other video games, there are large spinning coins, bundles of cash on the pavement, bags filled with money in vaults. But in Far Cry 2, the only currency worth anything are the diamonds. Inflation can kill money overnight and turn it from state currency with a face of a national hero to toilet paper or timber. This is another story told through currency. Our money is worthless because it's just a paper with a human face printed on it. What holds value, despite the war, is a natural resource that people all over the world consider valuable in itself and not as a representation of value. Nature dominates again in the world of Far Cry 2, and once more it is through indifference to human affairs. And there's no reason to think about all those ways to cut a diamond. Someone else down the line will take care of that. These are rough, just like the game itself. From illegal mine shafts where slave labor is utilized, through criminal hands and black markets towards European jewelry shops, where their price suddenly jumps. From there onto fingers and necks, then towards the controversy, all the way inside Far Cry 2. This is an example of a narrative iceberg, which Hemingway borrowed from Freud. You are exposed directly to a single feature, like an in-game currency, which is nothing new nor special. But what it represents is far deeper and more meaningful. It just takes a player to unlock this additional layer of the story. This brings to mind new monetary system from Fallout games, where you get to collect those washed out pre-war dollars from safes, but use caps as currency instead, since paper money is worthless. Throughout the whole game, your only motivation is financial gain. The only way to spend it is to buy better weapons. An inescapable vicious circle. But one singular effect that African setting has on the whole game, one that unifies the whole experience, is the element of depowering the player. In Far Cry 2, you are constantly reminded of your position within the world. One of the first consequences of game being set in Africa, one that caused a lot of controversy and isn't about to be implemented as mechanics anytime soon, is is malaria. You get inside a country with a simple order, kill the jackal, but it's not about to go down that way. Even though a lot of players deemed it a bad design choice, the fact that you suffer from malaria adds a lot to the game, and that man versus nature conflict. You are not the lord of death in this game, and even if you bring death to others, its original source is outside of you. This is atypical for an FPS. The fact that you may start to fatigue in the middle of the battle or a car chase puts you in a humble place from the very beginning of the game. You are just a human being in the middle of a war, with a sickness as a shadow looming over your head at all times. And when you think about it, it really is humbling, since being bitten and disadvantaged by a creature so small and insignificant goes against the very principle of a first-person shooter where threat is usually measured by size or numbers. In Resident Evil 7, your hand gets sawed off at the very beginning of the game in a violent and visceral sequence, but as soon as you wake up, it's stapled back. Fake danger, false threat. Malaria is there to stay, on every copy of the game, physical or digital, forever. To put an enemy inside of you instead of crocodiles lurking below the surface is an interesting choice. Not as tense nor dynamic as this, but interesting, because it tries to fill this shallow 3D model, if not with personality, then with the illusion of life and its fragility. To put this ever-present inconvenience over the player's head without the possibility to do it for good is a bold choice on the part of the developers. Perhaps bad, but bold. It is safe to say that we won't see it anytime soon in Far Cry series or any other series, but that is precisely what gives Far Cry 2 this classical aura, with look, feel, and features that have been extinct within video game industry for some time now. There is no doubt that the game would benefit greatly from the inclusion of crocodiles, poisonous snakes, lions, and other deadly animals that became a significant and signature part of later Far Cry games. But malaria was enough. Having to hunt in order to get crafting materials would have been too much of a hassle. Malaria is perhaps a bad mechanic, but it certainly creates a Cthulhu-like aesthetics, where there is an invisible enemy you have no real control of looming over your in-game existence. In first-person shooters, there is always a gun between you and everything else. Muzzle is the first thing you offer to the world, and you are destined to look at everything over its silhouette. It dominates your frame and is often an extension of both the avatar and player's will. Its sights are a tip of your perspective, driving you forward, pulling you in. It is an element often taken for granted, a means to an end, but it's not just an object through which you manifest your domination. It can become an aesthetical element. If dozens upon dozens of shooters utilize variety of firearms, and only a handful of them have durability systems, it must be that the developers have something to say with such a design choice. There has to be a reason they've worked to develop this inconvenience for the player. Apart from a mechanic that challenges the player's skill and ability to manage and survive, I believe one of the core reasons for this is to fit a specific aesthetic of the game. Call of Juarez does it because it is an epic adventure that wants to show us the brutality of the Old West. Fallout does it because it fits its post-apocalyptic setting. Condemned Criminal Origins does it because survival horror benefits from feelings of tension and helplessness. And Far Cry 2 has the same because you are in a failed state in Central Africa, in the middle of a civil war, with an influx of used weapons and an environment that doesn't care about your equipment. Rain, humidity, dry air, and dust are a part of this setting, and it reflects on your weapon. Every time you look at that ugly, rusted metal in your hands, you are reminded of where you are. Every time a gun jams on you in the middle of a firefight, you know you are vulnerable. And when it explodes in your face, you know there are unseen forces in this game that are stronger than you and affect you. Aesthetics mask code and systems and create an experience. Other FPSs rarely offer this. A gun is a gun and not an object that tells a story. Just imagine experiencing that. A firearm blowing up in your face. And in a first-person shooter, that genre with a long history of being blamed for corrupting teenagers and inciting real-life violence. This game goes against all established conventions. You don't get to lose your firearm inside a world where everything points its tooth and claw towards you. That is a creative risk in order to stay true to the overarching vision. This is perhaps the closest any first-person shooter will ever come to being a survival game. After your avatar nonchalantly discards that useless metal to the side, you are left with the question, how is it possible that a first-person shooter treats its guns like this? The panic you feel the first time, time. The disbelief, the shock, the excitement. What is the point of a game when it makes its core elements so weak? It doesn't care if you are in the middle of the shootout. It doesn't care if your other guns are jamming or if they are useless because you decided to play with a different loadout. It is not accustomed to the power of firearms in an FPS to this extent. It seems to me that even reloading is becoming a nuisance these days. Technically speaking, it is possible to be left with just a machete, which would make the game a glorified walking simulator. It's strange no one has made a playthrough of Far Cry 2 with just a machete. I mean, people have done crazier things. Even the golden AK explodes eventually. That ultimate concentration of power in shooters. The golden gun. Nothing is sacred in Far Cry 2. Even Fallout, where this mechanic fits post-apocalypse brilliantly, had the option to repair a damaged weapon in case you were emotionally attached to it, which is a repeating second chance granted by developers. Game still features mounted guns that are brutal manifestation of power, but even those can get destroyed or overheated, and even getting yourself behind one of these doesn't make you completely untouchable. To make weapons so unreliable and dispensable in a first-person shooter goes against the very principles of the genre, but it seems that this feature has pretty much died with Far Cry 2. It features visual firearm deterioration on a spectrum with complete destruction at the end, but even newly bought weapons have scratches, fading finish, and show signs of considerable wear. With use, they start to look dirtier and rustier, which is far more dynamic than just a dangling sling or swivel. The fact that some of them weren't in excellent state to begin with, just look how many scratches there are on this Uzi, tells a story that fits the core narrative of the game. These are used guns, smuggled in from countries where war has already ended and have already seen considerable action. To think that people have already been killed with those guns you use is outright bizarre. A single tool used by many hands in different conflicts to kill regardless of race, religion, and ethnicity, and it does its job flawlessly until it stops working in your hands. Video game arsenals have been dominated for the most part by the inescapable realism and necessary sensationalism, which meant that Glocks and gold desert eagles
Scaling
had to
ever
end
higher.
up in the same
You there,
inventories.
outsider.
Far Cry 2
You have
does
killed
not escape
proto-dragons
this.
before,
It
yes.
walks a fine line
So it
between
stands to
realism,
reason.
artistic license, and pure sensationalism, but it doesn't move too
Blood
far
of
away from
dragons.
the convention.
As
There's
you-
still Uzi and Mac, AK-47
Blood of
and
dragons.
M4, the
As
overused
you know-
Makarov, RPG, and the rest of the usual suspects already seen before. But there are oddities like the mortar or the dart gun. There are some purely aesthetical choices like the lesser-known Star instead of the 1911, an alternative to Classic, or the improvised explosive devices instead of C4. Star looks like
Of
a
wind
poor
and water.
man's 1911
To the east is a
copy
great
of a
dragon
tested
spring
and
which serves
proven
as a nesting
design,
area for
making an
wild
appearance
eagles.
in only one more
The feathers
game,
they shed still
i.e.
contain-
cool with all the detail, the duct tape, batteries,
clouds.
cell phone, and exposed wires.
With such
They
few-
also embody that
with
spirit
such-
of insurgency
with such few
mentality.
numbers.
An AK has to make an appearance, and in African setting makes more sense than it does in most games. Its recognizable silhouette follows Civil War.
This guy sounds exactly like Nico Bellic. It's awesome. I love it.
Tyrants, then taking it away from them.
Eastern
Ruben
Bloc
calls the
Russian.
AK-47 in one of his blogs. The diplomacy of this destitute country. Tranquilizer rifle is also a rare sight, putting everyone.
He sounds exactly
in
like
just
Nico
one
Bellic.
shot.
I fucking
Machete is a
love
purely
it.
cosmetic item, and
Took
it
me a
does
bit to
its part.
understand what I
It
was
is
hearing.
old, used and abused, with rusty metal and chipped edges, carried over from
Chipped
the original
edges.
game and turned into a signature
I
weapon
love
of the
this.
series. But by far, the most bizarre thing considering weapons is that since we know at the end that arms dealer is connected to Jackal, you're picking up or buying Jackal's merchandise the whole time. This is another example of the iceberg narrative. A weapon isn't just a weapon, it is a storytelling device. On the surface, it is just a 3D model, but on another level, it is a gun smuggled in by the Jackal that ended up in your hands, connecting you to the story. It is a foreigner, just like your character. And surplus weapons,
Just like your
remains of our
character.
wars that didn't end up in museums or private collections or got destroyed, found their way into Africa and are fueling conflict there. They aren't just tools, they tell stories. One war thriving on the carcass of another.
They're not biodegradable. Only the dead are biodegradable.
The game is set in 2008, that dark age of human history before you could turn yourself into a dog with your phone. The very frame of the word smartphone was a lot smaller at the time. If you want to find out your exact location, you have to dual wield an in-game map and GPS device, since there's no minimap. In-game map is just a bundle of papers with your current location on top. GPS is a ruggedized handheld device designed to operate in extreme environments. And you know that multi-tool you use to rip lead out of your flesh during what's bizarrely called healing animations? It's actually a part of the IED set. If it's good for twisting wires, why not operate on yourself with them? Ratchet has a cool animation in one of the buddy missions where you get to slam it against the valve on a gas canister and features unique repair animations for different vehicle types. All of this diegetic working equipment and animations make you more of a grunt and a working stiff than a warrior. Whenever you create a dynamic system within an open environment, there is potential for things to get interesting, from a goat simulator to first-person shooters. Mechanics themselves are rather simple. Different gun models have different stats and magazine capacity. Special weapons allow for a stealthier approach or ranged combat. Firearms condition impacts, jams, and malfunctions, eventually causing them to blow up. Fires can be started on purpose or by chance. Malaria attacks happen every 30 or 40 minutes. All of this multiplied by players' personality, play style, and skill in order to produce a variety of outcomes and experiences. This is emergent gameplay, where simple mechanics create complex situations to interact.
I always wondered what that malaria timer was, because I was like, it's not too often, but it's not too soon either.
Enemy AI doesn't constitute the whole of Far Cry 2's combat.
I was wondering what the
Being
timer
able to
was on
cut
that.
down individual branches with bullets is a rather meaningless feature on its own. But once you experience a shootout in the middle of the jungle, it becomes obvious how this attention to detail adds to the experience and immersion. Here I was attacked by gunboats. I didn't feel like returning fire, so I just kept on going. But an enemy started firing at me with a rocket launcher and destroyed my boat. I got out and I got an idea. Rockets fly past you relatively slow, so you can dodge them. One of them flew inside the river, right under one of the boats, creating an example of a somewhat goofy emergence. Aggressive enemy AI, rocket launcher specifics, and patrolling boats' behavior are all separate elements. Player's existence creates an interaction between them. A more serious example is gun jamming on you while you try to finish off a wounded enemy. It creates an emotional reaction. I was preparing for a final blow, and the game forced me to run for cover and unjam the gun. None of this is actually scripted, it just happens as a result of an intelligent design. Combat experience is just the final layer of the shooter, culmination of game design, a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. Locations are designed in such a way that supports different approaches and weapon loadouts. Gun blazing or sneaking in, sniping from afar or setting everything on fire. A guy shoots at me with an RPG. I try to return fire with a grenade launcher, but it's out of grenades. I switch to shotgun, but it jams just as another rocket is fired. I clear the jam, shoot, and miss, but it was my last bullet, and so I have to reload. This was unpredictable since you can't always have the newest guns. I can't stress enough how tense and exciting this situation was for me. Fire propagation system is a great example of a possible complexity. It interacts with your equipment, environment, and weather. It can be started deliberately or by chance, with a flamethrower, a flare gun, molotovs, grenades, a mortar, and rocket launchers. Carl Gustav also has a sneaky backblast you need to watch out for depending on where you are. Then there's ammunition caches that can cause real fireworks. There are gas canisters, gas stations, barrels, lamps, but enemies have grenades and rocket launchers as well. All of this can affect the combat immensely, turning fire into a master or a servant, regardless of your intentions. Large fires change enemy behavior, taking their focus off of you, but it can very well end up working against the player as well. It also changes the environment greatly, from dry to scorched, and it doesn't work as well in the jungle or near water. Once it starts to devour a dry patch of land, destroying without favor or prejudice, the depth of this web of interactions becomes obvious. A fire isn't just a fire, it is an enemy that attacks everyone, and it has no flag nor ideology. A truly terrifying mechanic with indifference as its greatest strength, and this is just a single system. Emergent gameplay requires adaptation. You can still plan and try to execute, but so many systems conspire to make things difficult for you. It forces adaptation as a playstyle. It's like some digital Darwinism where adaptation is the only rule of the land. This results in a lack of clear hierarchy of dominance. Nothing is written in the stone, since too many factors you don't have control over affect it. Chain of reaction is never the same. A large fire might end up as a sole winner from time to time. We've all felt that emotional landing once the game is mastered and gameplay becomes simply crossing chores off the list. Far Cry 2 does its best to prolong that feeling. Its systems will constantly interrupt your plans, challenging the conventional player dominance. While other shooters let us experience power we don't have in real life, Far Cry 2 teaches us the depths and randomness of power. Because of this, game almost feels alive. You can plan, but nothing guarantees the execution execution of those plans. Something lurking in the game's code challenges you, which leads to an interesting spectrum of possibilities and a more memorable gameplay experience. Indeed, it doesn't take too much searching online to find a lot of wild stories from Far Cry 2 fans that had never happened during your playthrough. I had similar combat experience only in Worlds of Stalker games, and to even have to bring up Stalker while talking about a Far Cry game is weird enough. When you reload a checkpoint in Far Cry 3, you're either going to go in guns blazing or utilize a stealthier approach, but for the most part the experience is going to be the same. Nothing really emerges out of its systems. Randomness of Far Cry 2 reduces such repetitive dominance. Since there's no mini-map, you have to stay alert in combat, but the fact that some of them actually get inside a vehicle and try to mow you down while you're exchanging fire with others is uncanny. You have to experience this artificial viciousness. This game should have a dog-eat-dog as a tag, or Darwinism instead of survival. Game design is almost anti-fun, but it's already been proven that there's place for it in video games, since anti-fun can be a lot of fun, just like not every book or film is fun. Perhaps some players are tired of domination, and your buddies aren't spared this brutality either. The way they die just states even strongly how meaningless everything is in this game. You don't get there in time and you just find a unique character model on the ground surrounded by other, less distinctive mercenary corpses. No theatrics, no cutscenes. In other games, they prolong this finality or exclude permadeath completely. Especially harsh situation is when you get there in time but don't have any morphine left, so you have to watch them die. Another important thing is that Far Cry 2 goes beyond players' personality.
Morphine was a really harsh
that are
mechanic.
consistent through time and space, and they make us behave a certain way. Different
Admirable work.
personalities prefer
It's
You match the
freezing
prowess
here.
of
I need to
Zero's
turn
finest
this
hunters.
becomes obvious in any
the
open
heater on.
game, but systems in Far Cry 2 often interrupt your
Just
natural
enough to warm the
rhythms, forcing
place.
you to adapt to its dynamic world. This is why combat in Far Cry 2 is so exciting, because it goes from ordinary to formless in seconds. You can't keep on reloading your gun after every shot. It breaks your OCD patterns with emergence. Far Cry 2, like majority of other shooters, offers a challenge. It's just that it approaches the idea differently. You don't get a sense of reward for carefully planning and brutally executing your plan, but for surviving an unpredictable chaos.
I like
If you
this
dominate in
kid. He's a
combat
good-
too
he's a
often,
good writer.
any tension will disappear from it, and gameplay will feel more generic. But all of this isn't just about the challenge.
It is just another example of how mechanics create aesthetical experience where there's an underlying theme that unifies them. Adapting to emergent gameplay of Far Cry 2 results in one such experience. Dynamic, unpredictable combat where it's easy to get your health halved by a shotgun blast. Reinforce your underdog status. Your pretensions are challenged mechanically and thematically. Violence in this game is not stylized nor choreographed. It happens with its own chaotic logic. This randomness takes meaning out of it. You are not a hero of the story. You do not dominate the environment. You don't get to leave a single significant mark on the whole game world, and you're not the only predator in combat. It all fits together. NPCs aren't just meat for your bullets. They are aggressive. They seek you out. They want your digital blood. Just think of how often you end up pulling their lead out of your flesh. They've really mastered this random, indifferent, casual, non-sensational brutality that doesn't glorify anything. Shootouts don't make you feel powerful, only skilled and sometimes lucky. There is a certain bizarre brutality in AI's behavior, which reinforces that dog-eat-dog aesthetics. They try to run you over with their car as you're busy fighting their friends. They fire rockets at you inconsiderate of the environment, and if they are gravely wounded, they make a last stand, pulling out their sidearm and waiting for a chance to take you down with them. They try to surround you. They drag wounded soldiers to safety. They don't give up. It takes time and bullets to make sure that they are not coming back. Their behavior forces you to adapt. You as well narrowly await death when saved by your buddy. Dying has layers in this game. That last stand is particularly bizarre, implying not just life and determination, but malevolence, rarely exhibited by NPCs. All of its individual and simple mechanics constitute a system that offers a variety of outcomes once the player starts to interact with it. But all of this is built under higher concepts and themes such as man versus nature. It's not just that systems interact brilliantly with each other, they reinforce the overall aesthetics of the game. There's no experience points popping up on the left side of the screen, reinforcing your sense of superiority. Instead of experience points, Far Cry 2 features a reputation system, a non-intrusive diegetic way to showcase your progress. When enemy reactions go from this to this, changes in your status become obvious, but this is most effective in combat. where they go from mocking you to fearing you and pleading for their lives. Apart from reinforcing your underdog status, combat is aesthetical in itself. It becomes a cacophony of sounds with screams and yells in different languages and accents, loud and punchy gunshots, bullets ricocheting off of different surfaces, enemies reacting to being shot, burst shotgun shells ejected from the chamber. There's even a ricochet if you hit enemy's weapon while they're falling to the ground, and rapid fire creates double vision of your iron sights. The level of attention to details is sometimes scary. Exploding ammo boxes can kill you if you get too close. Gas canisters spin out of control when shot, setting everything on fire. Especially bizarre is the behavior of rockets once the weapon starts to deteriorate. They fly regardless of your aiming. If you shoot an enemy while he's about to fire at you from an RPG, his aim is interrupted and the rocket hits something else. The rocket launcher could actually be utilized as a mortar if an enemy is hidden behind an indestructible object, since the rocket doesn't just disappear into the air. Soundtrack is more grounded, natural, organic. It simply follows your gameplay, rarely stimulating it. It's less aggressive than what came after, but still very well present and felt. It's never bigger than combat itself, which contradicts the exploding beats that often follow shooters in their fast-paced combat. It features an unconventional set of instruments for an FPS, trying to catch a piece of Africa that is around you in its rhythm. It's authentic and vibrant in its depiction of desolation and death. It fits the game really well and doesn't have a life of its own. Just listen to this. And then remember, you are in a first-person shooter. They've tried to incorporate checkpoints as the integral part of the game through Ruben's vlog and that introduction sequence in the cab. But no matter how hardcore you are, they are indefensible. That is the line between a fair difficulty and bad design. I can understand that AI does not want to die, but the speed with which they repopulate the checkpoint is ridiculous. It could have been handled better in a simple manner. Just put a couple of guys inspecting corpses and commenting on the carnage according to your reputation level. It's easier to swallow and it doesn't insult intelligence while offering a smaller challenge. Apart from deteriorating weapons and malaria, another thing that truly prevents you from conquering this world are precisely those checkpoints, which restrict your movement, forcing you to mind their presence whenever you are on the road. Combat is the single most expressive element of Far Cry 2. It carries forward its themes better than the story itself and lets you interact with them. It conveys a certain feeling about the world of Far Cry 2. A lot of praise and criticism of Far Cry 2 was because of its realism, but there is an important distinction to be made here. Realism is when you do everything to match the reality as it is. Pseudo-realism is when you present an altered view of reality as being real. In Far Cry 2, healing animations are exaggerated. Wounds have no real consequences. You don't limp after pulling a rod out of your body, nor have to shoot with only one hand. Guns don't deteriorate that fast in real life. You can't fix a car engine by tightening up a bolt. Firearm mechanics aren't always depicted correctly. Drinking lots of water is good, but it doesn't patch up gunshot wounds. Navigating by map would be a lot harder, and many more. Far Cry 2 does not depict real life. It distorts it. An average player only needs the implication of realism to know what the game is about. Can you kill dozens of police officers with a rocket launcher, or do you have to actually try in order to stay alive? Still, compared to other games, it definitely seems closer to real life in a lot of aspects, but it's far from realism. There isn't a mini-game where you field strip your weapon and apply oil by pressing E. Far Cry 2 is actually unrealistic. It gamifies reality but presents it as realism. They've definitely wanted this game to be perceived as realistic. They just didn't use realism to achieve it. A realistic shooter would be almost impossible to play. Pseudo-realism only implies realism, while still remaining a video game with its own rules that constitute a unique in-game reality. Life here is just an inspiration, and a somewhat loose framework. These mechanics are rudimentary representations of real life, pushed through video game culture in order to create a specific aesthetical experience. They are the final layer of the game, which tries to mask all the code below. This is why it is more of an aesthetical element than actual gameplay mechanic. There's no real depth to it. It uses bits and pieces of twisted reality within a larger conceptual frame to fake the experience. When
When you pull a piece of lead out of your flesh, it does not affect you beyond the shock, unweight through animations and the fact that you had to stop and perform the action in the middle of the fight. Hardcore survival games go a few layers deeper than that, with food and water, stamina and so on. They've used artistic license to create a sense of an unforgiving world, but these simple mechanics could be considered realism only within Far Cry 2 itself, but it depowers the player, which is the ultimate goal. Aesthetics of a hostile and indifferent world are supported by guns exploding in your face, lead being pulled out of your body, wounded soldiers making their last stand, doing morally questionable things with no one to judge you but yourself. But another element unifies the whole experience to an even greater extent. Your gaming experience is already framed by the edges of your screen and other hardware such as keyboard or a controller. It is also framed by your personality, taste and perception. Colorblind players have different experiences, for example. Game itself offers additional layers, perspective, setting, genre, all set very specific boundaries. But by far the most interesting frame of experience in Far Cry 2 is player character and its avatar. Character provides a backstory, offering a chance at role-playing by assuming the role of a mercenary, while its graphical manifestation frames your interaction with the world. Far Cry 2 approaches first-person religiously. It does break up the gameplay with cutscenes taking control from the player, but it doesn't take you out of Avatar for their duration. Other than that, and loading screens, the only way to escape the world of Far Cry 2 and break out of character is to fall unconscious, sleep, exit, or finish the game. But there is still a question, where is the character during a loading screen? If only loading screens could be eliminated, then the experience would become a single uninterrupted timeline that never.
That would be good. But yeah, remaster Far Cry 2 or make it loading screen less. And it was so good. It was so good. It improved the combat.
Naturally fits certain experiences, and Far
Maybe
Cry
a
2 is
co-op.
certainly one
It'd be
such
great.
experience. With third person, there is a much thicker line between the player and the avatar. The exact same game through a third person perspective would be a radically different experience. If you want to depower the player, give them deteriorating guns. If you want to immerse them into their depowered state, put them in first person. In most first person shooters, your gun is always pointed towards the world, which makes it all the more humiliating to see it lowered in submission once you enter a ceasefire zone. Interaction with guards can get tense precisely because of this. They insult, stare and push you away. Such intensity wouldn't be present in a third-person shooter. In order to experience the horrors of its themes, Far Cry 2 had to trap you inside a first-person perspective. From player's viewpoint, pulling a piece of lead out of Avatar's hand is never going to be as shocking and close as it is from a first person. Avatar's eyes become your doorway into the game. A story this visceral, absurd and brutal should be firmly placed in a first-person perspective. You don't get to go out of this skin and all that it does in this world until the end. It unifies the whole experience. In cutscene heavy games, you are a character in one point and just a camera in the next, looking at yourself. Perspective without 3D flesh or texture. But there are many games that never take you out of first-person perspective. Half-Life and Bioshock being the classical examples, where Far Cry 2 distincts itself is the physicality of its perspective. The amount of digital flesh and heaviness added to the avatar through animations
Looks
and
like you could all
interaction,
use
and
some
all of this through a set of hands.
There's
What a set of
saying for
hands they
this
are. You can see your
survival
character's
of the
chest and
fittest.
legs, but the avatar is basically embodied in those